Hey guys, tonight, we drift back through the velvet fog of time straight into the heart of Victorian London, a city teetering between horse-drawn opulence and coal-stained progress. You're walking slowly now, the hem of your coat brushing puddles of lamplight as gas lamps flicker behind wrought iron fences. Chimneys puff like overworked dragons, and somewhere nearby someone's definitely overboiling cabbage again. But you're not here for the Industrial Revolution or the political upheaval. You're here to meet a dog. Not just any dog. Dash. The pampered, fluff-coated companion of Queen Victoria, possibly the most spoiled canine in British history, and certainly the only one with his own French-trained chef. As you wind through the cobbled paths of Kensington Palace, the quiet crunch of gravel underfoot, you're struck by a strange reality. You're about to spend your evening following the tale of a spaniel who ate better than most of London. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling generous, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing our sleepy little global village in action. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open the gates of Kensington Gardens and step into the year 1837. The world is holding its breath. King William IV has just passed, and a teenage girl named Victoria has been crowned Queen of England. She's 18, barely 5 feet tall, and suddenly in charge of the largest empire the world has ever seen. And yet, as she wakes up in her lavish four-poster bed with its tassels and swans, her first thought is not empire, not politics, not even breakfast. It's Dash, a tiny Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, with bright button eyes and a feathery tail that swishes like a metronome of royal entitlement. He's curled at her feet, nestled into a cushion that reportedly costs more than the annual salary of a Buckingham Palace clerk. You reach the doorway to her private quarters just in time to witness a strange ritual. A royal footman bows not to the queen, but to the dog before gently lifting Dash onto a silver tray, like he's the crown jewels with fur. Victoria coos at him. She speaks baby talk. She kisses his nose right there with the kind of fervor usually reserved for religious icons or very good chocolate. This isn't a passing fad or a cute indulgence. This is love. Deep codependent, possibly bordering on spiritual. Historians still argue whether Dash's importance in Victoria's early reign was symbolic, representing her desire to keep something of her childhood close, or whether she genuinely believed he was smarter than most of her advisors. Either way, it wasn't just personal. It was policy. When Dash wanted attention, Victoria dropped everything. And if you think that's an exaggeration, ask Lord Melbourne, the Prime Minister at the time, who once had to wait 40 minutes outside her study because Dash had fallen asleep on her lap, and she didn't want to wake him. You shuffle closer and hear the rustle of papers and the clink of a porcelain bowl. Dash is being fed soft-boiled eggs lightly salted cooled to a temperature no greater than a baby's bath. A footman tests it with his pinky before offering it up. You blink incredulous. But no one else in the room seems to think this is odd. Now here's a detail you don't find in every textbook. Dash had his own set of silverware. Not just a bowl, a spoon, a dish with floral engravings. His initials DASH etched into the rim like some medieval knight. And woe unto the servant who placed it crooked on the breakfast tray. You trail behind as Dash trots confidently across the royal carpet, his ears flopping with every step. Guards move aside. Advisors bow. A duchess tries to offer him a sliver of biscuit from her purse and is promptly corrected by a stiff butler. Her Majesty's Dash does not snack between meals. You wonder if the queen knows how ridiculous it looks. But then again, who's going to tell her? Here in the gilded fishbowl of monarchy, every action ripples outward. Dash's preferences, what time he woke up, where he napped, which rooms he liked, began to subtly shape Victoria's routine. Morning meetings were rescheduled around walk time. Foreign guests were advised not to startle the royal companion, and when one ambassador French naturally referred to Dash as a chien de salon, Victoria took it as a compliment and had the phrase embroidered on his traveling satchel. Somewhere in the palace, a footman sighs and tightens the lace on Dash's sleeping bonnet. Yes, a sleeping bonnet, handmade by a seamstress who once stitched gowns for the queen herself. And you begin to realize that the dog is not just a pet. He's a gravitational force, a four-legged diplomat, therapist, alarm clock, and in at least one awkward situation, informal censor he once barked so loudly during a reading of state documents that the queen insisted they be revised. By the time you find yourself seated in the corner of the royal drawing room, watching Dash snooze beneath an oil painting of himself seriously, it's all beginning to make sense. You live in a world where a monarch commands armies, reshapes nations, and builds empires, and also spends 20 minutes picking out a ribbon for her dog's tail. Mainstream history loves to focus on the men in suits and powdered wigs, the wars and treaties, the revolutions and reforms. But tonight, you're peering into a velvet-trimmed microcosm of influence, absurdity, and tenderness, where a single wagging tail could silence a room. You blink slowly, the gas lights casting long golden shadows across the palace floor. Outside, Big Ben tolls gently in the distance, and inside, the most powerful woman in the world kisses her spaniel goodnight. You're still in Kensington Palace, though. Now the scent has shifted no longer. Just beeswax polish and old paper, but something richer. Cooked meat, perhaps. Or a stew of lamb and pearl barley. You follow your nose past red velvet curtains and down a narrow hallway, where sunlight streams through tall windows, catching on motes of dust like little sparks of gold. The light lands on Dash. He's sitting upright on a velvet pouf, one paw delicately raised as if he's about to ask you for the latest political gossip. But what's more astonishing than his posture is the procession entering the room. A footman with a silver platter, another with a cloth napkin, and behind them, in full white uniform with gold embroidery, the royal dog chef. Yes, that is his actual job. The man's name is Monsieur Beaulieu, and he studied in Paris under a chef who once cooked for Napoleon's niece. His resume includes nothing but aristocrats and at least one eccentric baron who insisted his parrots be fed only pink fruits. But Beaulieu never thought he'd end up here preparing multiple courses a day for a spaniel with allergies and a preference for soft textures. Dash's meals were no joke. You watch as the first course is served a small roasted quail deboned, the skin lightly crisped with a brushing of clarified butter. On the side, a spoonful of oat mash drizzled with beef reduction and a single sprig of rosemary for fragrance, not ingestion. That's an actual note from the palace kitchen manual. Beaulieu steps back, arms folded, like a sculptor admiring his work. Dash leans in, sniffs, and daintily begins his meal. The queen is watching from a chaise lounge sipping tea. She smiles. She relaxes, because Dash is happy. And when Dash is happy, the queen is happy. And when the queen is happy, the entire nation breathes easier. It's a peculiar chain of command, but here in this moment, it's undeniably real. Historians still argue whether Beaulieu's position was born from necessity. Victoria reportedly believed no common kitchen could properly appreciate canine digestion, or whether it was just another layer of royal eccentricity, stacked like marzipan on an already towering cake of pomp. Regardless, the job was highly coveted. Rumor has it that one of Beaulieu's rivals disguised himself as a gamekeeper just to get a peek at Dash's feeding chart. You lean in and glance at a copy yourself. It's handwritten in cursive so ornate it might as well be calligraphy, and it outlines every ingredient, every serving size, and even suggested spoon angles. Yes, angles. Apparently Dash didn't like shadows falling on his food. After the entree comes a palate cleanser, slivers of cucumber soaked in rosewater and served chilled. You're trying not to laugh, but the seriousness with which this is all being carried out has an almost hypnotic rhythm. There's a gentle tapping as the butler announces each dish with a small bell. A murmur from the footmen as they note Dash's reactions in a tiny, leather-bound log. Once, it's said, a dish of poached duck was returned untouched. The reason, too much time. Beaulieu was devastated. He reportedly fasted the rest of the day in penitence. And yet, this was more than spoiled luxury. Dash's meals were part of the Queen's daily structure, her private liturgy. She once described feeding him as restorative to the soul, a way to pause amidst the whirring machinery of empire and simply focus on joy, one bite at a time. You glance at a side table and spot something odd, a tiny ceramic pitcher. Inside, fresh broth. Simmered overnight with marrow bones, a bouquet of herbs, and filtered through cheesecloth 10 times. It's used to moisten Dash's food, especially in winter when the chill made chewing harder for him. The staff call it soup, but they whisper the word like it's sacred. Occasionally, a curious visitor, say a duchess's daughter or a bored noble, would try a bite from Dash's bowl just to see what the fuss was about. The reactions were mixed. Some claimed it was better than their own supper. Others said it was clearly missing salt and purpose. One fainted after realizing she'd just eaten something garnished with grated veal cartilage. You step back into the hallway slightly stunned and spot a portrait you hadn't noticed before. Dash again. But this time he's posed with a chef's hat at his feet. A quiet joke, perhaps. Or a proud signature from Beaulieu, who allegedly commissioned the piece himself and kept a miniature version in his quarters. The walls here remember everything. As you pass another door, you overhear two maids whispering about how Dash once refused to eat for 2 days after being served a cold slice of pigeon terrine. Victoria reportedly threatened to have someone disciplined. The cook at the time quit muttering something about dog tyranny and culinary madness. It's easy to laugh now walking these polished corridors imagining the heated debates over parsley versus mint. But you also begin to sense something deeper, how the Queen's obsessive care for Dash wasn't just about him. It was her anchor. A form of control in a life that offered very little of it. After all, she'd been groomed for the throne since birth, told what to wear, where to go, who to marry, and when to grieve. Dash was her one realm of unchallenged power, and she ruled it tenderly with gourmet menus and lavender-scented pillows. And maybe that's the real meal being served here. Not duck breast or marrow broth, but emotional nourishment, comfort, predictability. A loyal creature who asked for nothing but treats and offered affection on demand. Outside the window, the trees are trembling in a late autumn wind. The Thames mumbles in the distance. And somewhere below, a kitchen fire crackles as Beaulieu prepares the next course, a delicate pâté shaped like a crown, crustless and garnished with a single edible flower. All for a dog who, let's be honest, probably would have been just as happy chewing a sock. You're starting to understand now just how far this dog-shaped gravity field extended through the royal halls. You pad along behind Dash as he moves with the poise of someone who knows every creaking floorboard and every human soul who's ever bowed in his presence. He isn't just a pampered pup, he's infrastructure. Today, Dash is off to his favorite window seat in the south wing. It's been freshly dusted, the cushion restuffed, and the drapes tied back just so he can watch squirrels with the intensity of a bored philosopher. And once he's situated, you finally get a proper look at his living quarters. Or should we say, his suite. Because yes, Dash had his own private space in Kensington Palace. Not a kennel, not a basket in the corner. A furnished, heated, tastefully wallpapered room. The walls were hand-painted, with vines and roses, the floors covered in Turkish rugs, and the furniture included an ornate wooden chaise and a miniature armoire for his outfits. And oh, there were outfits. Embroidered coats for cooler days, lightweight muslin vests for spring, a travel cloak lined with satin. The Queen herself sometimes selected the fabrics. There's an apocryphal story, though, who's to say any more that Victoria once had a small tantrum because Dash's rain cape didn't match her umbrella. Mainstream history remembers Queen Victoria as dour, black-clad, emotionally restrained. But when it came to Dash, she was a different person entirely. Letters from her early reign are dotted with cheerful little notes about his health, his behavior, and whether or not he seemed peevish at breakfast. What's fascinating, historians still argue whether this is projection or pet psychology, is just how responsive Dash was to the Queen's moods. If she was anxious, he curled closer. If she cried, he pressed his head into her lap and whined softly. If she needed to be alone, he'd trot away and wait outside the door, motionless, like a sentry with floppy ears. The Queen's mother, the Duchess of Kent, didn't love Dash. And you notice that quickly. There's tension whenever the dog enters the room. The Duchess called him a distraction and once reportedly demanded he be banned from dinner. Victoria responded by having Dash sit beside her at the next banquet on a crimson cushion and gave him a bite of roast chicken before speaking to any guest. You step through an arched doorway into what looks like a sunroom glass all around warmed by a roaring fire and full of the scent of violets and dog biscuits. A maid is airing out Dash's linens. Yes, linens. Changed daily, scented with a dash of bergamot and occasionally ironed. The royal laundry staff once held a small whispered rebellion about it. You can't blame them. And still, you can't help but marvel at the sheer consistency of it all. It wasn't a one-time indulgence or a passing quirk. Dash's routine was more fixed than many government policies. He woke up at 7, ate his first meal by 8, walked at 9, napped by the sunbeam at 10, and so on. The palace ticked along to the sound of his tiny paws. One of the Queen's most trusted attendants, Baroness Leighton, became the unofficial guardian of the Dash doctrine. She kept logs of his moods, adjusted his blanket weight seasonally, and once spent an entire afternoon discussing whether the dog was favoring one leg. An examination was called. 2 doctors attended. No limp was found, but a velvet ramp was added to help Dash reach the chaise without jumping just in case. And there's more. Dash didn't like certain sounds, trumpets, door slams, and the creak of new shoes. So shoes were softened with wax. Doors were given padding. Trumpets. Well, a few performances were rescored. Because you simply didn't upset Dash. There's something oddly endearing about it. All isn't there. You lean on a gilded column watching Dash sleep as golden afternoon light pools around him. He's curled into himself like a comma, perfectly still tail twitching with whatever dream he's currently chasing, possibly a pheasant made of sausage. But what's quirky here isn't just the luxury. It's the message that even amid courtly drama, ministerial crises, and the brooding shadow of Empire, Victoria carved out this soft corner of her life for one small creature. It's hard not to find something sweet about that. A footman enters and carefully replaces Dash's water dish with fresh rainwater collected earlier that morning. Yes, rainwater, filtered through linen, cooled in silver bowls, and always served at room +1 degrees. He bows not deeply, but enough to show deference, and exits without a word. There's a sense of theater in all of this, sure, but more than that, it's stability, predictability, an antidote to the relentless, often suffocating pageantry of monarchic life. Dash didn't care about treaties, or scandal, or whether Victoria had accidentally offended the Prussian envoy again. He just wanted to sit near her feet. That kind of loyalty. It's a rare and comforting currency in these halls. Historians disagree on whether Dash's lavish treatment was a reflection of royal eccentricity, emotional compensation, or simply boredom. But one theory sticks out, that Dash was the one thing over which the Queen had absolute control. In a world where every move she made was scrutinized, orchestrated, and approved by someone else, Dash was hers alone. You leave the sunroom quietly, the soft click of your shoes muffled by thick carpet. Behind you, Dash lets out a long, slow sigh, maybe dreaming of rain-drenched gardens, or roasted quail, or nothing at all. Either way, he sleeps undisturbed. In the silence, you can almost hear the soft patter of legacy paws leaving impressions not on stone or scroll, but on a young queen's heart. You wake the next morning to a peculiar sound, something between a whistle and a warble. It's the call of Dash's chef, summoning the kitchen staff. Because today is no ordinary day. It's a holiday. Not a national one, mind you. This celebration exists solely on the Dash calendar, which is real and kept in the private drawing room. Today marks the anniversary of first biscuit accepted without sniffing a date. Victoria remembered fondly for years. So it's a feast day. You descend the servants' stairwell into a flurry of activity. The royal kitchens are abuzz with tension and time. Monsieur Beaulieu is pacing like a military general before battle, waving a ladle and muttering about gelatin ratios. His assistant, a young woman with soot on her apron and fear in her eyes, is carefully arranging roasted carrots into something resembling a floral bouquet. And then you see it. The pièce de résistance. A molded aspic in the shape of a miniature Castle Buckingham. To be specific. The gelatin sparkles faintly under the light. Inside, suspended like royal jewels, are slivers of partridge beef marrow and carrots cut into perfect crowns. On top, a single candied cranberry meant to resemble the royal standard. It wiggles ever so slightly. You want to ask if it's serious, but the look in Beaulieu's eyes stops you. This is the Super Bowl of dog dining. As the clock chimes 11, the feast is transported very carefully on a silver trolley. The procession glides down the corridor. Dash is waiting in the garden pavilion wearing a festive cravat mint green with tiny acorns embroidered along the edge. A harpist is softly playing in the corner, mostly for Victoria, but also in theory to soothe digestion. The meal begins with a toast. Not the edible kind, a literal toast offered by the Queen, raised in a crystal glass of watered-down sherry. To Dash, she says, her voice warm, whose joy outpaces even the sun. You're not sure if that's charming or deeply worrying, but you nod anyway. Everyone does. Dash is served his feast in 3 courses. First, a consommé of duck and marrow strained to the clarity of royal tea. Then a slice of venison pâté on a bed of barley topped with a poached quail egg that gleams like a pearl. And finally, the castle aspic, which trembles with noble dignity. It's all gone in minutes. By the time Dash licks his final morsel and curls beneath Victoria's chair, half the kitchen is either weeping or collapsed in emotional exhaustion. And somewhere down the hall, a junior footman sketches the aspic in his notebook, just in case. But not every dish went this smoothly. Historians still argue whether the infamous eel incident of 1839 was an honest mistake or a moment of culinary rebellion. The story goes that Dash was once served a delicately steamed eel prepared in the French style with white wine and dill, but recoiled, barked, and vomited on the Queen's shoes. She was so distressed, she canceled a state engagement and insisted on a full inquiry. The eel recipe was banned permanently. And then there was the gooseberry gaff. A new sous chef, unfamiliar with canine digestion, garnished a stew with fresh gooseberries. Dash broke out in a mild rash, and Victoria ordered the entire kitchen staff to write a formal letter of apology, in cursive, signed by each of them, even the scullery boy. You pause to take in this surreal culinary history. How many dog dishes have left behind paper trails longer than most mid-level treaties? But don't assume it was all French sauces and light stews. Occasionally, Dash indulged in what Beaulieu called the rustic palate. On some Sundays, the kitchen would prepare something simple, a boiled beef shin or lamb shoulder with a light apple glaze. These dishes, oddly enough, seemed to be his favorites. Once, Victoria asked if perhaps she was overcomplicating his meals. Beaulieu was said to have paled and whispered, "Your Majesty, a dog of this rank must not return to peasant fare." Still, there's evidence that Dash occasionally stole from the less royal table. A page's diary recounts an incident where Dash slipped into the servants' quarters and devoured half a tin of sardines meant for supper. Victoria found it amusing. Beaulieu did not. The page was discouraged from further sardine storage. Later that week, a small sign appeared on the pantry door, "No fish beyond this point," by royal order. Now, as you wander back into the kitchen, you notice the staff cleaning up from today's extravaganza. One maid is scraping jelly residue from a silver mold while humming a lullaby. Another is polishing the monogrammed serving dishes. Beaulieu is seated finally relaxed, sipping tea and rereading his notes. You catch a glimpse of the page Dash, responsive to root vegetables, reassess game bird schedule. Even now he's preparing, because tomorrow brings new variables. Will Dash be in a spring mood? Will he want parsnips or no parsnips? Will the quail be too gamey? The Queen might not notice, but Dash will. And when Dash notices, so does the entire palace. You step outside to clear your head. The air is crisp, and in the distance you hear the bells of St. Mary Abbot's Church. Somewhere between the laughter of garden birds and the faint crackle of chimney smoke, you feel a curious peace. There's something oddly comforting about a world where so much care, so much ceremony is poured into the happiness of a single spaniel. You walk the path back to the pavilion where Dash is now snoozing gently on a sheepskin rug. His belly is round, his paws twitch in dream. The Queen sits nearby, her hand gently resting on his side. She looks content. Not royal, not powerful, just human. Sometimes even a queen just wants her dog to eat well and nap on her lap. There's a particular kind of silence that follows a royal meal, thick, syrupy, filled with the clink of distant china and the rustle of drapery being drawn shut. You find yourself drifting through the palace's west wing, the warmth of the kitchens fading behind you, and wander toward a smaller chamber tucked behind the Queen's private sitting room. It's not on any official blueprint, but it is without question Dash's room, or rather, his quarters. You gently nudge the carved door open and step into what can only be described as a canine sanctuary. The lighting is soft, filtered through pale blue curtains stitched with golden thread. The wallpaper is covered in hand-painted florals, the floor laid with thick rugs, and the scent in the air is a mixture of cedarwood and lavender. A gentle breeze drifts from a hidden vent in the wall, keeping the temperature precisely controlled. At the center of the room is Dash's bed. But calling it a bed feels criminally insufficient. It's more of a throne in miniature. Carved walnut frame, silken mattress, and not one, not two, but 3 embroidered pillows, each one bearing his initials, D.A.S.H. There's even a canopy, and on the side table, a porcelain water dish fresh, a grooming comb made of ivory, and a bell, just in case Dash required anything in the night. The bell is tuned, yes tuned, to a specific pitch, so that only the nearby footman on duty can recognize it. No one knows what happens if Dash rings it at 3 a.m. But legend has it, a footman once sprinted barefoot down the marble hallway with a warm shawl and a slice of ham. This wasn't even considered odd. At this point in court life, Dash duty had its own rotation. Newly promoted pages often began their palace careers shadowing Dash. The expectation wasn't just care, it was reverence. And getting on Dash's bad side could be career limiting. One particularly unlucky footman was reassigned after stepping improperly while Dash was mid-nap. Whether that meant stepping too loudly or too close, no one could say. But within a week, he was reassigned to inventory work in the wine cellars, where you can't disturb the terrier, the Queen allegedly said. Historians still argue whether this kind of treatment was pure eccentricity or part of a broader attempt by Victoria to recreate a kind of miniature kingdom within her control. After all, she had grown up under the thumb of the Kensington system, a rigid set of rules that controlled everything from when she woke to who she spoke with. Dash may have been her first act of rebellion. A tiny revolution in fur, and the palace it adjusted. Even the architecture started to reflect Dash's presence. Carpets were replaced with softer materials to accommodate his paws. Low ramps were installed beside staircases. Doors were retrofitted with quiet hinges, and servants were instructed to hover rather than walk when moving past Dash's chambers. There are records of tailors requesting approval from the Queen before entering the wing, just in case the sound of sewing shears might be disruptive. You wander into the adjacent grooming room. Yes, there's an entire room for that. It holds brushes of every bristlecomb sorted by material, a wash basin shaped like a scallop shell, and a shelf of imported oils from sandalwood to chamomile. Dash's preferred blend, almond and lavender. Applied twice a week, gently massaged into his ears and behind his collarbone. Because, of course, he had a collarbone regimen. Once, Victoria herself gave Dash a bath, an event chronicled in her own hand. She described it as delightful, though she noted he protested the towel with vigor. He nipped at the hem of her sleeve, and then promptly fell asleep still damp on her lap. The entry closes with, "He has more sense and affection than many men I've known." You smile to yourself. It's hard not to. You drift toward the far wall where a small cabinet displays Dash's accessories. Collars lined with velvet, tiny medals from court events, a green silk harness used for carriage rides, one particularly ornate piece, a diamond-encrusted collar gifted by a foreign dignitary, shimmers in the gaslight. You remember hearing a story about this. One of the diamonds went missing shortly after a royal ball. What followed was palace pandemonium. The Queen was furious, and the search consumed 2 entire days. The gardeners were questioned, the scullery maids interrogated. The suspicion even reached a minor duke who'd been seen petting Dash rather aggressively. In the end, the diamond turned up in the corner of a tapestry. Dash had somehow dislodged it while scratching. Crisis averted. Dignity restored. From then on, the diamond collar was worn only on highly supervised occasions. You glance at a dusty corner near the fireplace and find an old leather-bound book. It's titled Regimen of His Highness the Spaniel, a sort of manual written by Leighton, the Queen's closest confidant, to help new staff understand the intricacies of caring for Dash. Inside are instructions on tone of voice, soothing, never stern pillow arrangement, always north-facing, and acceptable treat ingredients. It's part diary, part doctrine. There's even a short poem scribbled in the margin. He eats like a prince, he sleeps like a star. No distance too great, no demand too far. For Dash is the heart where Victoria clings, more faithful by far than men crowns or kings. The ink is faded, the sentiment eternal. As night falls again over Kensington and the hallways begin to glow with candlelight, you return to Dash's chambers. He's curled on his pillow, breathing softly. Victoria stands nearby, her hand resting on the carved bed frame. For a moment, there's no queen, no empire. Just a girl and her dog. And in that quiet, a truth whispers through the velvet air. Even sovereigns need something small to love. It's early morning again, but this time you're not in Kensington. You're riding in a royal carriage, yes, with Dash. Because even dogs apparently need a change of scenery. And when the Queen moves, Dash moves with her. Today's destination? Windsor Castle. But don't picture some simple road trip with a blanket in the back and a bag of biscuits. This is a full-fledged royal transport for a dog with very particular standards. Dash travels in style. The carriage is lined with plush cushions, color coordinated to complement his coat, deep burgundy and soft cream. His personal footman sits across from you holding a small case that contains an emergency grooming brush, 2 starched napkins, a vial of ginger tonic in case of indigestion, and a monogrammed water bowl with a non-spill base. You peer through the window. The countryside rolls past like a moving painting. Dash, however, is unmoved. He stares ahead with the regal boredom of someone who has traveled this route dozens of times, and found each journey equally beneath him. You imagine him saying, "Wake me when there's a pheasant." When the carriage arrives at Windsor, it is not Dash who is carried in. He walks "thank you very much," head held high, tail swishing with casual power. He's led not through the servants' entrance, but through the main archway. A groom discreetly lays down a small rug so his paws don't touch the cold stone. You think this must be a joke? It is not. Inside, the castle rooms have already been prepared for his arrival. Staff know to hide the iron grates on the fireplaces. He doesn't like the metallic clink. A maid replaces all the fresh flowers in the drawing room with unscented varieties. Dash dislikes lilies. And in the Queen's private salon, a second cushion is laid near her feet. Not beside, not behind, precisely at her side so he may look out the window if he chooses. You explore the castle as the Queen settles in. Dash is already making his rounds, visiting the familiar corridors, sniffing the drapes and politely ignoring the humans. The butlers have long since learned not to pet him without invitation. One overzealous understeward once offered him a bit of trifle, and Dash responded by sneezing directly into the man's cravat. The Queen called it a fair rebuke. As you step into one of the smaller libraries, you come across a curious item, a short document labeled "Preferred Sleeping Positions of His Highness Dash." It's been updated 3 times and includes diagrams. Apparently, his positioning changes seasonally. He prefers to face west in winter, something about catching the afternoon light, and east in spring. If his sleep is disturbed, the Queen herself will rearrange the cushions. Historians still argue whether these rituals were born from genuine canine needs or from Victoria's own complex relationship with routine and order. After all, her life outside the palace was never private. But within these walls, Dash's comfort was her domain. Later that day, the Queen hosts a private luncheon. A few select guests, nobility ministers, one overly dramatic painter, are seated in the grand dining room. And who you ask sits beside her chair on a raised velvet stool. Dash. He's impeccably groomed fur brushed to a shine. Occasionally, the Queen leans down to stroke his ears between bites. Not a single guest acknowledges him aloud, though several offer sly glances. To do more would be gauche. But everyone knows if Dash dislikes you, your chances of securing funding for your latest project drop significantly. Once a visiting earl sneezed near Dash and then laughed. Dash, offended, turned away and didn't look at him again for the rest of the visit. 3 weeks later, that earl's estate expansion request was denied. Coincidence? Officially, yes. Unofficially, the servants called it the barking veto. You make your way to the gardens. Dash is enjoying his post-lunch constitutional trotting along the gravel paths, lined with perfectly trimmed box hedges. He pauses to sniff a statue, glances disdainfully at a pigeon, then continues on. A gardener discreetly steps aside, doffing his cap. Not to Victoria. To Dash. The royal kennels at Windsor are impressive, spacious, warm, immaculately clean. But Dash doesn't stay in them. He stays in the castle always. The kennels are for other dogs, couriers, hunters, the occasional visiting hound. Dash. He's a resident. In fact, the castle staff once constructed a small dog-sized door so Dash could enter and exit the Queen's chamber freely. Carved from mahogany, trimmed with gold, and covered at night with a velvet curtain to keep out drafts. It was rumored to cost more than a country vicar's annual wage. A footman once tripped over it and broke his ankle. When asked if it should be removed or adjusted, the Queen responded, "The man can learn to walk more carefully." Even in Windsor, Dash maintains his elaborate routine. Meals served in the East Corridor. Afternoon sunbathing on the window seat in the Queen's study. Grooming at precisely 5:15. You wonder if perhaps he knows the exact time by the movement of shadows. Or maybe he just trained the clocks to obey him. Inside the Queen's sitting room, you find another curious artifact, a set of tiny steps beside her writing desk. Not for her. For Dash. When she works late into the evening, he joins her settling on the padded chair beside her, or watching as her pen scratches across parchment. If she grows agitated, he nudges her hand. If she sighs, he rests his head on her foot. It's hard to overstate just how much presence this dog has. He's not comic relief. He's not a novelty. He is a fixture woven into the fabric of palace life as deeply as the gold threads in the Queen's robe. And tonight, as torches are lit along the outer wall and Windsor glows with quiet splendor, you watch from a shadowed corridor. Victoria sits in her favorite chair by the fire, reading aloud not to her advisors or her ladies-in-waiting, but to Dash. His eyes are closed. His breathing is soft, but you can tell he's listening. And in that moment, the queen isn't ruler of an empire. She's just a girl with her dog in a borrowed sliver of peace. Back in London, word begins to spread not about a new law or a foreign alliance or an economic speech from Parliament. No. The latest palace gossip Dash's diamond collar is missing. It begins with a whisper from the upholstery maid who notices that the small red jewel part of the central clasp is gone. She reports it to the underbutler, who then, with theatrical urgency, reports it to Beaulieu. Beaulieu pales. The queen has not yet noticed. By the time you arrive in the corridor outside the queen's private sitting room, the household is in a silent frenzy. Not a loud panic, this is royalty after all, but the refined chaos of a dozen people quietly tiptoeing around disaster. Dash, of course, is unfazed. He's curled on his usual cushion, chewing something that looks suspiciously like a piece of embroidered curtain. Victoria sits nearby, blissfully unaware. The collar, golden and dainty, rests around his neck, but the jewel is indeed missing. A ruby the size of a currant. Gone. Within hours, the entire staff is alerted. A quiet but thorough search begins. Tapestries are lifted, carpets rolled back, cushions unstuffed. The soup kitchen somehow is searched twice. One gardener who had been trimming hedges near the queen's window that morning is questioned. Not formally, but enough to make him sweat. The palace doesn't call in the police, of course. Too messy, too public. Instead, they initiate something even more terrifying, a full sweep by the queen's personal chamberlain and the Baroness Leyden herself. And she, let's be clear, takes nothing lightly, least of all a misplaced gemstone belonging to Her Highness's dearest companion. You trail behind the search party as they comb through the queen's bedroom. Under the bed, behind the writing desk, they examine Dash's toys, particularly his favorite velvet squirrel, now slightly drooled upon. Nothing. The jewel has vanished. Historians still argue whether this infamous incident was an actual theft or just a case of accidental dislodgement. Some claim the ruby fell during one of Dash's frequent cushion escapades. He had a habit of rolling around like a loaf of fur, especially after meals. Others believe a servant pocketed it, then panicked and disposed of it. No proof was ever found. The queen finds out the next morning. She's calm at first, then icy. She examines the collar herself and gently runs a finger over the spot where the ruby should be. He looks incomplete, she murmurs. You might expect an edict or an official announcement. Instead, she simply orders the entire collar removed and locked away in her private vault. From then on, Dash wears a simpler collar, blue silk with a gold trim. No stones, no fuss, but you notice a small change. He seems less interested in wearing it. The old collar becomes the subject of legend among the staff. Some say the ruby was hidden in the pantry's sugar jar and accidentally baked into a pie. Others insist it was swallowed by Dash himself and passed unnoticed during a garden walk. One valet claims the queen's cousin took it as a petty slight. He'd never liked Dash, and the dog once barked at his gate. A particularly strange theory found scribbled in the corner of a kitchen ledger suggests the ruby was cursed, that it caused unusual levels of footman clumsiness and should be buried at sea. The note is unsigned. But what really makes this debacle so iconic isn't the missing stone. It's the ripple it caused. For weeks after the palace ran under stricter conditions, Dash's grooming sessions doubled. His walks were chaperoned. A short-lived idea to have a jewel check protocol before and after each outing was abandoned only after Dash chewed the list into shreds. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the staff is spooked. One young scullery maid, convinced she would be blamed, writes a tearful confession only to retract it hours later, when it's clear she's never even seen the dog, let alone his collar. Beaulieu, ever the loyal chef, takes the matter personally. He composes a small pastry shaped like the missing ruby and presents it to Dash. The queen smiles for the first time in 3 days. Dash sniffs, it takes a dainty bite and licks the icing. For a moment, balance returns. But not for everyone. The gardener, who'd been questioned early on, suddenly stops showing up for work. Rumor has it, he fled to the countryside fearing he'd be blamed if the stone didn't turn up. Others believe he simply wanted to escape a workplace where a spaniel's jewelry caused more stress than royal decrees. You return to the drawing room a few days later. Dash is back on his cushion, collarless for the moment. The queen is writing letters, but her eyes linger on him more than the page. She seems calmer now, as if the drama has settled into a resigned acceptance. Perhaps we overdid it, she says softly to no one in particular. And maybe she's right. Maybe the diamond collar was too much. Maybe Dash didn't need a ruby to be adored. But even in its absence, the echo of its loss remains. The household walks more carefully. Servants speak in hushed tones. And somewhere in the minds of all who witnessed the affair is the quiet realization that in this palace, even a missing trinket from a dog's neck could shake the very air. And Dash. He yawns, stretches, and flops on his side, blissfully unaware. Or perhaps perfectly aware and completely uninterested. He has his cushion, his queen, and a new chicken pâté waiting for dinner. Who needs rubies when you already rule the world? It's a foggy Tuesday when something strange begins happening in the halls of Buckingham Palace. The Queen's inner circle, ladies-in-waiting, low-ranking nobles, even a foreign attaché or two, are all doing something rather undignified. They're trying to impress the dog. You don't notice it at first. Not until you see a baroness subtly slip a ribbon-wrapped treat under a lace napkin, or a duke twice knighted fumble in his waistcoat for a tiny silver bell, which he gently rings in Dash's direction before pocketing it again. At first glance, it seems innocent, harmless, but then you hear the whispers. Has he sniffed your gift yet? He ignored the cravat I had made, embroidered his initials and everything. Oh dear. Lord Wexley's lapel was licked. He's certain of it. What you've stumbled into is a new kind of court game, politics. It begins as a gentle trend, small tokens for Dash offered casually during visits with the Queen. A honey biscuit here, a velvet bow there. But soon it escalates. Dash receives a miniature parasol from an Austrian countess. An earl commissions a leather-bound book of poetry for canine eyes only. And then there's Lady Whittington, who sends an entire picnic hamper filled with pheasant moose monogrammed napkins and a tiny bottle of lavender cologne labeled "for his paws only." The Queen says nothing at first, but it's clear she notices. When Dash accepts a gift, she smiles more warmly at the donor. When he ignores it, her eyes narrow ever so slightly. It doesn't take long before political hopefuls start crafting entire strategies around canine approval. One ambitious member of Parliament actually has his tailor produce a cloak for Dash. A rich navy velvet trimmed with gold thread, stitched with his family crest on the inside lining, not the outside. Too obvious. No. He wants it to seem like a coincidence. The cloak is presented anonymously. The Queen feigns surprise. Dash wears it once. The man's bill to increase rail funding is mysteriously expedited within the week. Historians still argue whether Dash had actual influence over policy, or whether Victoria merely associated those who doted on him with a general sense of loyalty. But either way it worked. If you wanted favor with the Queen, you made friends with the dog. And woe unto those who tried too hard. There's the famous case of Sir Bicknell, a nobleman who presented Dash with a mechanical mouse, imported from Switzerland. The mouse clicked. It moved erratically. Dash hated it. He barked, knocked over a vase, and ran behind a curtain. The Queen was not amused. Sir Bicknell's invitations dried up like biscuits left out overnight. Then there was the Spanish ambassador who, unaware of protocol, attempted to lift Dash into his lap during a formal dinner. Dash growled. A low, disapproving thrum from deep within his chest. The man, flustered, tried again. This time Dash barked. The Queen stood and calmly removed herself from the table. 3 months later, diplomatic relations were still frosty. The staff naturally had opinions. Footmen rolled their eyes at the parade of embroidered handkerchiefs and handcrafted dog shoes. A kitchen maid began keeping a secret scorecard titled "Desperate for Dash," in which she ranked guests based on their bribes and Dash's subsequent reactions. The top score went to a duchess who composed a lullaby and sang it in French while holding a plate of goose terrine. Dash fell asleep. The Queen beamed. The Duchess won a summer estate lease the following week. But politics wasn't just for the upper crust. Palace staff began participating too. A gardener shaped hedges in the likeness of Dash's silhouette. A pastry chef made tiny cookies stamped with his paw print. Even the mail clerk delivered letters in envelopes bearing Dash-themed wax seals, unofficial of course, but enthusiastically received. There's a quiet moment where you see Dash sitting atop a cushion during an afternoon salon. Around him, nobles hover in what can only be described as a halo of hopeful gazes. One man subtly squeaks a plush toy. A woman coughs and drops a biscuit with dramatic flair. Dash yawns, utterly unimpressed. Because here's the truth: you can't buy Dash's affection. You can't even rent it. He's not mean. He's not greedy. He simply has preferences. He prefers ear scratches from the left, treats served warm, voices pitched slightly below tenor. He likes Mozart over Beethoven, silk over wool, and hates anything citrus-scented. And once he chose a complete nobody. A newly arrived Irish governess brought in to assist with the younger cousins was seated quietly near the window reading a novel. Dash trotted over, placed his head in her lap, and sighed. She froze. Everyone watched. The Queen raised an eyebrow, intrigued. That governess was invited back to tea 3 times that week. You begin to understand how this strange ecosystem functions. Dash isn't just a dog. He's a social barometer, a living litmus test for sincerity, patience, and quiet kindness. Those who tried too hard, he avoided them. Those who ignored him, forgotten. But the ones who treated him with gentle familiarity, those were remembered. Back in the Queen's drawing room, Dash curls at her feet as she listens to a briefing from her advisors. A minister drones on about tariffs. Another frowns over naval expenditure. Victoria nods. But occasionally she looks down at Dash. He blinks up at her, calm and quiet. She makes a decision. Confident. Immediate. Did Dash influence it? Impossible to say. But it's curious that the minister who brought him a duck liver canapé last week now finds his report very well received. And just like that, the game of politics goes on silly, sweet, absurd, and somehow more impactful than anyone dares admit. Because when the most powerful woman in the world trusts a spaniel more than her entire cabinet, you best hope the dog likes your cravat. There's something almost mythic about the way Dash appears in portraits. You wander through one of the quieter palace corridors, where oil paintings hang like time capsules, staring solemn monarchs in starched collars, landscapes soaked in mist, and then suddenly, there he is. Dash. Not tucked into a corner, not perched casually in a lap, no front and center, seated on a velvet cushion, as if awaiting his coronation. The Queen is beside him, smiling softly. But everyone's eyes go to Dash. This isn't a one-off either. As you move deeper into the royal portrait gallery, the pattern becomes unmistakable. Dash shows up in painting after painting, sometimes full-bodied, sometimes nestled like a furry jewel in the folds of a royal gown. In one particularly grand piece, he's posed atop a pillow, embroidered with the words, "Forever faithful." It's unclear whether the Queen commissioned it herself, but you wouldn't put it past her. The artist, a man known for his icy temper and elaborate brushwork, reportedly once stormed out of a session after Dash refused to sit still. The Queen insisted he wait until Dash was in the mood. That was 4 hours later. The artist came back. He always did. Historians still argue whether Victoria's obsession with painting Dash was symbolic of maternal longing, emotional projection, or simply very on-brand eccentricity. But it's clear that these portraits weren't just about love, they were a declaration. Dash wasn't a background detail. He was a royal subject. One visitor and art critic with more cheek than caution once commented that Dash had a better portrait record than half the royal family. He wasn't invited back. What's most amusing is how Dash seemed to know. On days the easel was brought out, he would preen a little more, stretch a little longer, and curl his tail just so. There's even an entry in Leighton's journal describing how Dash refused to sit near one of the Queen's lesser-known cousins during a group portrait session. He would not be painted with the Marquess. He growled until he was relocated. No one objected. The Marquess, mortified, offered to be painted alone. Not all the paintings were formal, though. Some were charmingly odd. A watercolor shows Dash wearing a miniature crown made of daisies. Another more abstract work by a French guest artist depicts him as a symbol of loyal monarchy, with floating biscuits around his head like a halo. The Queen adored it. The Prime Minister did not. And still, you find sketches tucked into drawers. Informal, personal, unguarded. One, drawn in pencil, and slightly smudged shows. Dash curled on Victoria's lap, both of them asleep. It's not signed, but the handwriting in the corner reads, "He snores." So do I. These images, dozens of them, are more than royal record. They're a love letter, a quiet, relentless insistence that this small creature mattered not just to the Queen, but to the story she wanted told. And it had ripple effects. Other nobles eager to match the Queen's devotion began commissioning pet portraits of their own. Suddenly, the drawing rooms of London were filling with oils of dachshunds in waistcoats, pugs wearing feathered hats, and one unfortunate pug named Waffles, who was depicted riding a miniature pony. The Queen found it charming. Dash was unimpressed. Artistic circles took note. A new school of portraiture emerged, animal regalia, they called it. Painters who'd once worked on naval battles now found themselves mixing tones for terrier fur. One even hosted a gallery exclusively for pets of the peerage. The opening gala included champagne salmon canapes and one greyhound who chewed through a landscape of himself. But of course, no pet outshone Dash. His portraits began circulating outside the palace, printed on fans' hand mirrors, even snuff boxes. You see one such fan now resting on a lady's vanity, a delicate thing of ivory and silk, with Dash smiling up from the folds, looking like he owns the world. Which, in a way, he does. You walk through another hall and find what might be the most touching image yet. It's a tapestry hand-woven finely detailed, showing Dash not in splendor, but asleep beneath a tree. No collar, no crown, just peace. The Queen had it hung in her private retreat. She once called it the truest likeness. Visitors don't see this one. And somewhere a page tells the story of how Victoria once stood before that tapestry for over an hour in silence, not reading, not speaking, just standing. Then she turned and left. That night, she didn't attend supper. Dash, they said, hadn't been well, because for all the grandeur, all the royal glamour woven into every stitch and brushstroke, the truth always circled back to something simpler. These weren't just portraits of a pet. They were keepsakes of stillness, fragments of calm in a life overrun with obligation and spectacle. You exit the gallery just as dusk settles over the palace. The chandeliers glow like softened stars. Somewhere in the sitting room, Dash is likely snoring gently musically like a little kettle just starting to boil. And the Queen. She's probably sketching him again, because monarchs come and go. Crowns tarnish, thrones wobble. But a dog who loves you back now, that's worth painting over and over again. You're standing in the middle of the audience chamber, its high ceilings echoing with murmured Latin and shuffling silk. Today's session isn't a full state council, just a private audience with a select few ministers. The Queen sits at the head of the long walnut table, a sheaf of documents before her spectacles perched delicately on her nose. Her gaze is fixed, thoughtful. But here's what no one prepared you for. Dash is in her lap. Not beside her, not at her feet in her lap. Curled into a contented, snoring croissant of fur, occasionally twitching his paw at a dream mouse or biscuit. And somehow no one is making a fuss. No sideways glances. No cleared throats. Because by now, everyone knows if Dash wants the lap, Dash gets the lap. The Minister of Trade is droning on about tariffs with all the urgency of a man who knows he's being ignored. Victoria gently strokes Dash's ears as she listens. Or half listens. Every so often her fingers pause. In thought, resuming only once, Dash lets out a sleepy sigh. It's as though he's her metronome. The pacing of an empire tied to the rhythm of a nap. You watch the Prime Minister shift uneasily in his seat. He has notes, concerns, questions, but there's a dog involved now. And there are rules unspoken but ironclad. Rule 1. Don't speak when Dash is yawning. The Queen finds it disrespectful. Rule 2. If Dash shifts position, pause. You wouldn't want to jar His Highness's slumber with anything as uncouth as diplomacy. Rule 3. Never ever ask if the dog must be here. The last man who did that was strongly encouraged to take an extended holiday in Scotland. Historians still debate how much influence Dash really had in these settings. Did his presence shape foreign policy? Could the course of Britain's naval expansion have shifted because Dash sneezed on a map? It's probably absurd. And yet, ministers began adjusting their tone of voice, depending on whether he was asleep or awake. That counts for something. You notice how even the Queen's speech changes when she holds him. It's softer, more fluid, less sharp at the edges. Her sentences trail into thoughtful pauses rather than curt decrees. One minister once remarked that it was like debating legislation in a nursery, and he meant that as a compliment. During one particularly tense discussion about colonial taxation, Dash lifted his head, sneezed audibly, and turned his back to the room. The Queen smiled. "Even Dash is bored," she said. The conversation promptly adjourned. But this isn't just a sideshow. Dash is a barometer, a pressure valve. When tensions rise between rival ministers, competing factions, or just bad tempers in stuffy rooms, Dash absorbs it. He shifts, he wiggles, he rolls over with a theatrical sigh that somehow dissolves everything. You realize quickly, this isn't chaos. It's careful orchestration. A soft weapon in a sharp world. And not everyone is happy about it. A few die-hard traditionalists still grumble about decorum. They write letters. Anonymous complaints about canine disruptions to crown business. One particularly gruff noble insists Dash's presence is an affront to Her Majesty's authority. The Queen reads the letter out loud, in the presence of Dash, then proceeds to tear it into 4 neat pieces and feed it to the fireplace. And then, she tucks a blanket around Dash's haunches. These scenes become more common than not. The Queen holds court with Dash present, sometimes in her arms, sometimes pacing beneath the table. Once, during a particularly lengthy speech on infrastructure, Dash began to bark. 3 quick yips. No one knew what he meant, but the Queen nodded solemnly and responded, "Indeed, we mustn't forget the human element." The comment made it into the Times the next day. Later you wander into the ante-room, just off the council chamber. A small table holds biscuits and tea. One of the butlers is quietly replenishing a crystal bowl. Not for guests. For Dash. They're chamomile dog biscuits handmade baked fresh each morning. He only eats 2. Never 3. 3 is excessive. Dash has standards. One junior advisor shares that during his first royal audience he accidentally stepped backward and lightly tapped Dash's paw. It was barely a nudge, but the Queen froze. The room fell silent. Dash stared. He held eye contact, the advisor whispered later, still pale. For 12 seconds. I timed it. He wasn't invited back for 2 months. Of course not all ministers feared Dash. Some leaned into it. Lord Chesterfield brought him tiny gloves, once a gag gift meant to lighten the mood. Dash ignored them completely. The Queen giggled for 10 full seconds. The gloves were placed in Dash's toy drawer, where they remain untouched to this day. But perhaps the most infamous moment came during a confidential briefing on European unrest. Maps were spread, options debated, voices raised, tensions high. Dash, seemingly asleep, stood stretched and promptly sat on the Minister of Defense's feet. He didn't move for the next hour. Afterward, the minister was heard saying, "I've faced riots, but I've never been more terrified than trying not to wake that dog." You pass the royal scribe in the hallway. She smiles and shows you her notes. At the bottom of every meeting transcript is a section marked Dash Status. Today's reads, dozed for 25 minutes, awoke briefly at import taxes, barked once, licked own paw. Queen seemed reassured, and that's what Dash really is. Reassurance. A steady breath in rooms full of fire. A grounding presence in a palace built on performance. While history books list parliaments and wars, prime ministers and rebellions, you now see what they miss, the subtle shaping of a reign by one soft, snoring pup. Because sometimes history isn't just written by men with swords or pens. Sometimes it's nudged gently forward by a warm body on a queen's lap. It's raining the morning Dash dies. The kind of steady muffled drizzle that turns gardens into watercolors and cobblestones into ghostly echoes. The palace is unusually quiet. Even the maids tread softer, their footsteps swallowed by the velvet hush that has wrapped around every corridor like a damp shawl. You don't hear the kitchen clatter. You don't hear laughter from the footmen's quarters. You only hear the rain. Dash has been ill for some time. Not that the Queen let anyone call it that. She said he was tired, needing rest, in need of fewer visitors. But the truth was known. Even the youngest pages had begun whispering about it, how his naps had stretched longer, how his meals returned half-eaten, how the sparkle in his eyes had dimmed to a flicker. Victoria sits with him, now curled beside him on the chaise in her sitting room, her face pale and drawn. There are no advisors present. No court. No distractions. Just her and Dash. Her first great love. She strokes his fur in slow, practiced movements. There's nothing left to say. Historians still argue about the exact date of Dash's death. Some records place it in 1840, others earlier. But what no one debates is the impact. Because in that moment, as the Queen cradled a dog no larger than a loaf of bread, the foundation beneath the monarchy shifted. It wasn't about the politics. It wasn't even about the grief. It was about the sudden vacuum of presence. You walk through the hallway leading to the Queen's chamber and find the palace draped in black. Not just the expected mourning banners, but black ribbons tied to doorknobs, tiny swaths of fabric tucked beneath oil paintings, a wreath of violets pinned to the velvet cushion, where Dash once napped. Staff are weeping openly. The royal chef refuses to cook that morning. Beaulieu, the dog's longtime culinary attendant, is inconsolable. He spends the entire day writing and rewriting a recipe Dash's favorite barley broth with rosemary, though no one will ever make it again. And the Queen. She doesn't speak for 3 days. She sits with Dash's empty cushion, her fingers tracing the frayed edge where he used to tug with his teeth. The pages are dismissed. Laidzin, normally composed and unshakable, is seen crying quietly in the garden. A letter from Victoria to her cousin, now housed in a private archive, reads, "Only, my sunshine has left the room." What followed was unlike anything the palace had ever seen. Dash was given a funeral. Not a small farewell in the garden. Not a quick burial behind the greenhouse. A proper ceremony planned, attended, mourned. Victoria wrote the inscription herself, and it was carved into a marble gravestone placed in the Windsor Gardens. Here lies Dash, the favorite spaniel of Her Majesty Queen Victoria, in whose affection he had no equal, and who from his earliest youth was her constant companion. A cushion was buried with him. So was his favorite brush, a small biscuit tin, and a sprig of lavender. And then came the truly royal touch, black armbands. Issued to staff. Worn by footmen, housekeepers, even visiting courtiers. For a week, conversation inside the palace was conducted in hushed tones, and all musical rehearsals were cancelled. A visiting dignitary from Austria, unaware of Dash's passing, made a casual remark about a hunting dog. He was corrected bluntly and with tears. The Queen ordered all portraits of Dash in her private rooms to be turned toward the wall for a full month. Not removed, just turned, as if to give them rest or privacy. And in the center of it all stood the Queen, silent and fragile in her grief. She began wearing a small black ribbon pinned near her collar, a ribbon that would remain in some variation for years. You walk to the garden where Dash was laid to rest. The rain has softened to mist now, and the hedges gleam with droplets like morning jewelry. The grave is simple. No crown, no fanfare. Just the carved words and the Queen's own handwriting chiseled into stone. She visits here often, alone. What's astonishing is how the world beyond the palace responded. Letters poured in from nobles, foreign dignitaries, even commoners. Some offered condolences. Others shared their own stories of lost pets. One child sent a crude drawing of a spaniel flying toward the stars with the words, "Tell the Queen he's happy now." The Queen kept it in a drawer beside her journal. Even Parliament took note. A motion was briefly tabled, suggesting a small commemorative plaque in the Royal Gallery, not officially passed, of course, but recorded. And that perhaps says everything a spaniel born into no title, no throne, no agenda, still managed to move the machinery of empire. One footman said it best, "We've buried kings with less ceremony." In private, the Queen's grief carved deeper. She became quieter in council. She dismissed a scheduled portrait sitting. For a time, she refused to walk the garden paths Dash had once explored. Her letters during this period are filled with little shadows, melancholy phrases, soft heartbreaks. In one note, she writes, "They say I rule the world, but it was his eyes I looked to each morning. And here's what you feel, more than. See, this wasn't the death of a dog. This was the death of a constant. A companion who had never judged her, never flinched from her crown, never once tried to use her for gain. Dash was not a symbol. He was her heart with fur and 4 legs. You sit by the grave for a while, the mist curling around your shoulders. There are fresh violets on the headstone left this morning, maybe. Or maybe they've always been there. Eventually, you rise. The path back to the palace feels longer, the world a little heavier. And inside, the Queen sits at her desk again, the ink dry in her pen. The cushion at her feet remains empty, but never forgotten. The grave itself is modest as royal graves go. Nestled beneath a willow tree in Windsor's shaded south garden, it doesn't clamor for attention. But once you know where to look, you can't help but be drawn there. A slab of marble weathered just so engraved with the Queen's own words. Yet, the story of that inscription, oh, it was anything but quiet. The moment the Queen handed over her handwritten draft, elegant, melancholy, precise, the trouble began. The court's chaplain took issue with the line, "In whose affection he had no equal." He argued it overshadowed Christian duty and risked placing a dog's love above that of man, or worse, God. The Queen did not take this well. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked up from her letter writing, blinked twice, and said, "Then we shall consider him above all men, but Christ, which is more than most can say." The chaplain reportedly turned the color of a boiled beet. Still, the debate lingered. Could a royal memorial, even an unofficial one, equate canine affection with divine fidelity? The Archbishop of Canterbury himself weighed in via letter cautioning the palace to avoid confusion between spiritual virtue and sentimental fancy. Victoria ignored the letter, then had it filed right next to her pressed violets from Dash's first walk. You stroll along the path that leads to the grave. The hedges are neatly trimmed, the grass always just a little greener in this corner. There's even a tiny wrought iron fence around the stone. Not to keep people out, but as the Queen once joked, to keep Dash from running off in spirit and causing mischief. Yet the inscription itself, it wasn't the only point of contention. One of Victoria's uncles, a gruff red-nosed man fond of port and hounds, offered a less poetic epitaph. Faithful fat and fond of pheasant, he'd said half drunk at a dinner. The Queen did not laugh. Even within the family, the monument stirred tension. Prince Ernest, her brother, questioned the expense. Should the nation foot the bill for dog marble? He asked. Victoria replied that the monarchy could do without another ivory-backed inkstand that year. The funds were reassigned. Dash got his stone. The actual carving of the epitaph became an event in itself. The stonemason, a nervous man from Bath named Holloway, was summoned to Windsor personally. He arrived trembling, his pockets stuffed with pencils and prayer cards. He bowed so deeply he nearly toppled forward onto the gravel. The Queen handed him the parchment. "Please render it faithfully," she said. "Do not flourish the D. Oui, yes, your majesty." He worked on it for 3 days, slept in the servants' quarters, refused wine, ate only boiled eggs, and when it was finally done, he asked if he might kiss the paw print embossed on Dash's last collar, which had been pressed into clay as part of the gravestone's decoration. Permission was granted. To this day, that paw print remains barely noticeable unless you know where to look. Worn down by decades of rain and rose petals, but still there, still firm. You overhear 2 maids nearby talking about the grave. One says she visits it every morning before beginning her shift. Not out of superstition. Just comfort. "It's like he watches over us," she murmurs, placing a buttercup at the foot of the stone. Inside the palace, the inscription causes another stir, this time among the poets. Word gets out that Victoria has written it herself. Several prominent authors, including one especially pompous laureate, offer to compose alternatives. Longer, rhymed, grand. One begins with "Lo faithful beast, in earthly slumber laid." The Queen declines. She doesn't explain why, but Leighton notes in her diary, she says no one knew him better than she, and that includes godman or poet. The gravestone becomes a pilgrimage of sorts, not just for staff, but for visitors. Royals from neighboring nations begin requesting to see it. One Prussian princess reportedly burst into tears upon reading it, and then spent 10 minutes sobbing into her handkerchief beneath the willow tree. "I loved a dog once," she told her husband. He did not get marble. Over time, gardeners begin maintaining the plot with particular devotion. A small bench appears. No one knows who added it. It's unmarked plain but perfectly placed. Someone even strings little ribbons along the fence posts. In spring, never more than 4 never mismatched. In a peculiar moment, years later, Prince Albert visits the grave alone. He's not a dog person, never has been. But he sits for a long time, hands folded in his lap, reading the words. When asked later what he thought, he simply says, "It is very true." And perhaps that's the heart of it. That simple phrase, in whose affection he had no equal, wasn't meant to be poetic or profound. It was just true. Dash had been there before the crown, before the empire, before the weight of the world settled on Victoria's shoulders. He had barked and yipped and curled up beside her when the corridors felt cold and empty. His love wasn't political. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't filtered through the pageantry of court life. It was just love. Pure, unconditional, often slightly damp. And so the gravestone remains. Quiet, unassuming, oddly defiant. A declaration carved in stone not just for a dog, but for the part of Victoria that remained untouched by throne or scepter. The rain begins again as you leave. Soft, gentle, and behind you, beneath that tree, Dash sleeps on. The garden where Dash is buried becomes something of a sacred space. Not officially. No plaques, no inclusion on royal tours. But the staff know. So do the Queen's inner circle. You walk the path again, the gravel crunching softly beneath your shoes, and sense it how this one patch of land breathes with a gentler rhythm. Victoria starts spending more time here. Sometimes reading, sometimes writing, sometimes just sitting. A small wrought iron table is set near the bench now, and on quiet days, she takes her tea beside the grave. Dash's favorite biscuit tin remains tucked beneath the table, even though she never opens it. Ritual is its own kind of comfort. You spot her there once, dressed in black posture, relaxed, but eyes distant. Her fingers slowly trace the rim of her teacup while a robin hops nearby undisturbed. It's the kind of quiet only deep memory can make. Soon the garden becomes her personal place of remembrance. Not just for Dash, but for stillness itself. When foreign guests arrive, she doesn't always show them the throne room or the gallery. Sometimes she brings them here. And when she does, she tells them stories not about war or diplomacy, but about the time Dash tripped over a garden gnome or how he used to bark at the gardener's wheelbarrow as if it were an invading army. Some guests laugh confused. Others smile politely. A few cry. But one thing is clear. The Queen wants them to know. Wants the world to remember that there was once a creature who brought joy not to a throne, but to a girl trying her best to wear one. After a while, more dogs come into Victoria's life. They always do. There's a parade of new paws, each with their own quirks, collars, and royal reputations. One of the most notable is Noble A. Collie, who wins the Queen's heart later in life. He's dignified, loyal, and frequently photogenic. But none of them are Dash. You can tell. So can everyone else. Each new dog is treated well, royally even. They dine comfortably, travel lavishly, and sit for official photographs. But Dash's cushion is never reused. His collar never passed down. The Queen keeps his belongings tucked away in a wooden chest lined with silk. Inside are his toys, his tiny brush, and the last note she ever wrote about him. He loved me. That was enough. Historians still argue whether Victoria's persistent mourning for Dash had a psychological link to her later more famous grief over Prince Albert. Some believe Dash prepared her for that kind of loss. Others say his death made her more fragile. But all agree Dash was the first to leave a mark that no title or duty could erase. You see echoes of him in other places too. In a letter to her daughter, the Queen includes a sketch of a spaniel with the caption, "He haunts the window seat still." During a visit to Balmoral, she orders a cushion placed on the east-facing bench for old time's sake. And once on a particularly stormy night, she reportedly told her lady-in-waiting that she dreamed of hearing his bark in the corridor. "He was chasing shadows," she whispered. "He always did." Even public commemorations begin to tip their hat to Dash. A small children's book is published anonymously detailing the adventures of a clever royal dog who outwits court gossip and saves the Queen's teacup from disaster. It becomes an instant hit. Victoria requests 10 copies. One of the palace artists, a younger, more romantic type, paints an imagined scene of Dash greeting Albert at the gates of heaven. The Queen doesn't hang it, but she keeps it near her desk. She never admits it out loud, but she dusts it herself. In a more curious turn, Dash becomes something of a folk icon. Middle-class families begin naming their dogs Dash. The name appears in nursery rhymes on biscuit tins and even on a line of embroidered linen sets marketed as fit for a Queen's companion. The irony, of course, is that Dash would have hated the attention. But that's legacy for you. It's never entirely yours. Once it leaves your lap, you wander the halls of Windsor now and feel it that absence that somehow never stopped echoing. Dash's cushion remains in storage. His portrait, though once turned to face the wall, has returned to its rightful spot. And on certain evenings when the Queen walks the garden alone, the staff say they see her lips moving gently as if reciting a story only Dash would understand. And maybe she is. Because grief isn't always grand. Sometimes it's a small bowl left untouched, a collar that no one dares polish, a soft rustle in an empty hallway. Tonight, as you step once more into the garden, the moonlight draping the grass in pale silver, you sense it too. Not just the loss, but the loyalty that came before it. The friendship, the laughter, the barking, the ridiculousness of it all. And in the middle of it, a little marble stone. Unassuming. Radiating something far louder than silence. Dash. Still guarding her. Still waiting. By now, you've probably noticed a strange truth settling into your bones. Dash didn't just pass through Victoria's life. He set a precedent. After Dash, no royal pet would ever again be just a dog. Expectations had changed. The court, once mildly bemused by Victoria's devotion, now assumed a pet wasn't merely for companionship. It was a political actor, a symbol, a tool for soft power and press-friendly photo opportunities. But Dash. He didn't care for any of that. He just wanted quail stew and a warm laps, and perhaps that's why he remains the standard no successor could ever quite touch. Still, that didn't stop them from trying. You make your way to the palace, archives rows upon rows of thick ledgers and narrow drawers filled with yellowing pages, and discover something extraordinary, a document labeled the Canine Ledger. It's real. It's detailed. It was updated for decades. It begins naturally with Dash. Each entry includes the dog's name, breed preferences, and get this, their emotional alignment. Dash is loyal, willful, manipulative when bored. A fair assessment. Flip a few pages, and you meet Flora, a skittish Pomeranian who disliked loud voices and only walked in straight lines. Then there's Annie, a black terrier who once chased a minister's hat into a duck pond. Both were sweet. Neither had Dash's gravity. One dog, Hector, a bulldog gifted by a Russian ambassador, was too independent. He refused to wear bows, growled at footmen, once ate a visiting countess's lace gloves. He lasted 4 months, and then came the corgi. This one's name was Maple, small barrel-chested, with ears like radar dishes and a prance that could put military parades to shame. The queen was intrigued. The staff were skeptical. But Maple had potential until she got into the pantry one night and ate half a tray of custard tarts, meant for the Archbishop of York. The scandal became known as the Tart Incident. No one was punished. But Maple's portrait, which had already been sketched, was quietly removed from the queen's desk. It was replaced without comment by Dash's likeness once again. The lesson was clear. Loyalty was good. Charm was necessary. But discretion was everything. Historians still argue whether Dash's legacy directly influenced palace pet culture or whether it was merely coincidental. But patterns began to emerge. Royal dogs had their own sleeping quarters, special menus, travel bags, embroidered coats. All things Dash had pioneered before such excess became fashionable. Even the public began to expect it. When newspapers caught wind that one of Victoria's later dogs was not receiving hot broth during winter, a flurry of letters arrived. What would Dash think, one reader asked? Another signed simply, "For the memory of the spaniel." Royal pet behavior became an unofficial barometer for the queen's mood. If the dog was groomed, all was well. If the dog was absent from view, cabinet ministers began sweating. One advisor famously delayed a proposal because he hadn't seen a single paw in 3 days. You read in a tucked-away letter from a young lady in waiting that Victoria sometimes measured a person's soul by how they greeted her dog. If they bent down a good heart, if they hovered distrustful, if they ignored the dog entirely, unfit for table seating. You chuckle, but you also understand. Dash wasn't a filter, he was a mirror. Over time, court painters now well-versed in fur and floppy ears began leaving subtle nods to Dash in other portraits. A cushion embroidered with a D, a spaniel-shaped paperweight on a desk, even a patch of fur tucked behind a curtain just out of view. Royal Easter eggs, if you will. There's one particular painting, unsigned, unfinished, hanging in the deepest part of the archive. It shows the queen seated in shadow, her face only half visible. But at her feet is Dash, fully lit, eyes open, looking right at you. No throne, no crown, just a dog. A few decades later, Dash becomes part of palace training. New staff are quietly briefed. We do things the Dash way. It means you arrive 5 minutes early. You offer comfort without words. You remember that in the royal house, kindness isn't a gesture, it's policy. Even foreign courts began to take notes. A visiting queen from Belgium once asked, half in jest, if Dash's recipes were available for her own terrier. The queen offered a simplified version. The dog lived to 17. The Dash standard, as it's sometimes called, begins to infiltrate royal design too. Cushion dimensions are subtly modified for maximum paw comfort. Kennel windows are enlarged for sunlight. Ramps become standard. There is an actual discussion, serious documented, about commissioning a Dash memorial garden in Scotland. It never happens, but the idea is raised. Twice. And the name It lingers. At least 6 dogs in royal service are named Dash in his honor. None are quite the same. One is particularly lazy. Another has a stuttered bark. But they try. Everyone does. They want to believe that maybe with enough treats and patience they might catch a flicker of that original magic. But you know better. Dash wasn't a formula. He was a one-time storm of fluff sass And strangely democratic judgment. A dog who made ministers quake, who once barked during a recital so loudly the performance was postponed. A dog who turned his nose up at a Spanish slipper but adored British mutton stew. He was, in short, unforgettable. And as you walk past the Queen's private salon, now long since emptied of court chatter, you notice a little embroidered spaniel on the edge of a throw pillow. A quiet nod. A soft echo. Because even in a house of grandeur, some things are remembered not in gold leaf or stained glass, but in thread. In tea. In the habits passed from paw to paw. The legacy of Dash lives not just in what was pampered, but in what was loved. The Queen never says replacement. That word would have been far too cold, too mechanical, too final. But after some time, months, maybe a year, a new dog arrives. A small bundle of energy with bright eyes and nervous paws. His name is Turi, a gift from her half-sister. He's a sprightly papillon, with ears shaped like little angel wings and a disposition that can only be described as eager to please, but mildly overwhelmed by velvet furniture. He is not Dash, and everyone knows it. The first week is awkward. Turi is given Dash's old cushion. He won't sit on it, sniffs it, circles it, eventually curls up on the floor beside it as if sensing the space is already full. The Queen watches this in silence. No instructions, no coaxing, just observation. The staff notice it too. Meals are served as before with care and pageantry, but there's less ceremony. The roast quail is replaced with something gentler. The cushions are less fluffed, the grooming less fussy. It's as if the entire palace is collectively holding its breath, wondering if Turi will ever quite fit into Dash's shadow. Historians still argue whether this period was deliberate mourning or quiet resistance to change. Victoria never clarified. But her letters during this time speak in past tense. He used to nap beside me. He would have loved the violets this spring. Turi is mentioned only once, a good pup. But not my heart. You walk past the palace drawing room one afternoon and hear an odd little scene. Turi, barking a high-pitched, frantic sound, and the Queen's voice calm and amused saying, "Oh dear." Dash would have rolled his eyes. The court laughs, but there's a tremble in the air. It becomes a recurring issue every new dog is seen through the lens of the first. One footman is reprimanded for referring to a new arrival as Dash Jr. The Queen corrects him. There is no junior. Only once. You can't help but feel sorry for the dogs that follow. They are loved, of course. Victoria is not heartless. She feeds them well, strokes their ears, keeps them near. But there's a difference between care and closeness. The Queen has built a little fence around part of her soul, and only one name is carved on the gate. There's one curious exception, a spaniel named Islay who arrives during a particularly cold winter. Islay is shy, limps slightly from an old injury, and has a habit of pressing his head into the nearest patch of warm fabric whenever nervous. The Queen takes to him slowly, cautiously, then unexpectedly deeply. Islay never sleeps in Dash's spot. He chooses the windowsill instead. And somehow that earns him respect. One day, Victoria writes, he asks for nothing. Like Dash. But he does not pretend to be him. That is perhaps why I can hold him without sadness. Still, she never refers to Islay as my heart. That title remains with the one who claimed it first. You browse the Queen's private writing desk one evening, just figuratively of course, and find something fascinating. A folder labeled Correspondence-Posthumous. Inside are 5 letters, written by the Queen. Never sent. Never intended to be. They are raw. Personal. One of them reads, "I held another today." He trembled. "You never did. Why do I look for you in every blink another ends simply? You were the first thing that was only mine." In one, she mentions how the court tried to name a new spaniel, Her Majesty's Companion. She refused. There can be no second, she wrote. Eventually a new title is created, Palace Comforter. A diplomatic compromise, less emotional, more manageable, but the stories persist. Visitors ask about Dash. The Queen tells them funny anecdotes, how he once chased a bishop's train, or how he hid under the table during a thunderstorm and wouldn't come out until someone brought him toast. The stories soften over time, become polished, polite, but you notice whenever she laughs, her eyes drift left, toward the empty cushion, always just for a second. At formal dinners, she allows the new dogs to linger at her feet, but never in her lap. Not once. The lap, it seems, is sacred, reserved, remembered. One day during a visit to Osborne House, a guest brings a young terrier Rowdy, joyful nipping at table legs. The Queen smiles, pets him, then mutters, "Dash would have eaten him alive." Everyone laughs. But there's a pause afterward, a silence that says she still misses him. You follow her later that evening as she walks the garden paths. No escort, no guards, just her and the dusk. She carries a single rose and a piece of folded paper. You don't see what's written, but you know where she's going. The path winds past the hedges, the sundial, the little mossy bench. To the grave. She lays the rose down, gently adjusts the ribbon already there, and sits. Just for a moment. Her hand rests on the stone. She whispers something. You don't need to hear the words to understand. The Queen's world moved on. New dogs came. New joys. But Dash Dash was never replaced. Only remembered. Because some loves live just once. And once is forever. The job description didn't exist before Dash. Not officially. No parchment scroll. No appointment by royal seal. But somewhere along the way, palace life quietly adapted. A new role emerged, the royal dog trainer. You might expect a firm hand to whistle, perhaps someone with breeches and a hunting horn. But instead, you meet Mr. Puckle, a man with the shoulders of a stable boy, the eyes of a philosopher, and a voice so soft it makes Lace seem aggressive. Mr. Puckle is not here to teach tricks. He's here, for one reason, to understand what the Queen's dogs want. Before they do, you observe him in the gardens one misty morning. He kneels beside a young terrier, his hands folded, saying nothing at all. The dog stares at him, blinks, then, slowly, almost reverently curls up beside him. It's not obedience, it's trust. Puckle never taught Dash, but his methods were born from Dash's legacy. The standard he set was less sit and more be present. And the Queen. She adored him. Victoria often called Puckle the Whisperer, though not to his face. He blushed too easily. Over the years, Puckle became more than a dog handler. He was a confidant, a note-taker, a quiet presence during stormy moods and state crises alike. Once, during an especially tense visit from German dignitaries, the Queen requested Puckle remain in the room, not to speak, not to advise, just to sit in the corner with the new spaniel Wilbur and keep him calm. Later, when asked why, she simply replied, "I needed someone who wasn't lying." Historians still argue whether Puckle ever had official authority, but there are countless letters bearing his annotations, food preferences, mood reports, nap routines. In one margin, he scribbled, "Prefers boiled parsnips to raw carrots. Avoids heavy strings in music." He was effectively the royal dog therapist. You stumble upon his quarters tucked behind the kennels. Small, tidy, filled with little tokens, pressed flowers, framed sketches of dogs, long past in shelves of journals bound in soft leather. On one shelf sits a note from the Queen herself, dated the year after Dash's passing. "You are not like the others. Neither was he. Thank you." Puckle never boasted, never socialized with the higher-ups, but when he walked the halls, staff moved aside. Not from fear, from respect. You could spill wine near a royal vase and be forgiven. But step on one of Puckle's feeding schedules, you were in trouble. Over the years, his influence deepened. He began attending grooming appointments, advising footmen on cushion placements, even inspecting the palace's floor wax. Certain polishes he claimed made the dogs slip and feel insecure in their dignity. At one point, Parliament cut funding for non-essential staff. Rumors swirled that Puckle would be dismissed. The Queen responded by threatening to fund his salary from her own household budget. The funding was restored. Quietly. Permanently. But the most telling moment. It happened during a thunderstorm. The Queen was mid-letter when the skies cracked open. The new puppy Maisie trembled and bolted beneath a settee. The Queen called for Puckle. He arrived, sat on the floor, and told the dog a story. A real story. About Dash. He spoke softly of the time Dash stood in a puddle and refused to move because he saw his reflection and thought it was an enemy. He mimicked Dash's bark, described the curls behind his ears, even made the Queen laugh. Maisie crawled out and into his lap. Calm. Safe. Afterward, the Queen said, "That was a better sermon than I've heard in years." You look through Puckle's records and find something remarkable. A series of drawings he made of Dash, not just as a dog but as a presence. One shows Dash as a shadow curled beside Victoria's feet in Parliament. Another as a constellation above the palace roof. One shows him sleeping under the Queen's chair while the world spins wildly outside. each labeled unseen but felt. Toward the end of his life, Puckle began writing a small book. Not for publication, just for memory. It was titled The Ones Who Wait by the Fire. It's half memoir, half meditation. One page reads, "They do not speak our language, but they say what no letter ever could. I watched a queen love a creature, not because she ruled him, but because he didn't care that she ruled anything. He died quietly, they say, in his chair, a dog at his feet." The queen kept a lock of his hair in a small silver box right next to one of Dash's collars. Today, the role he created still exists under different names with more bureaucracy. But the essence remains someone who listens, who comforts, who honors the relationship between monarch and mutt, not with rules, but with reverence. And you sit for a while in his old room, dust dancing in the light. The journals smell faintly of lavender. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, sharp, clear, proud. You smile. Because, in a world that values crowns and scepters, Puckle chose soft paws and gentle sighs. And that truly is a kingdom worth serving. The official narrative says the dog was a gift, an act of goodwill between two nations. A furry olive branch, if you like. He arrived in a satin-lined basket accompanied by a letter sealed with blue wax and the scent of rosewater. A foreign dignitary seeking to flatter Her Majesty had sent her what he believed to be the ultimate token of affection, a rare breed known in his homeland for its elegance, intelligence, and ability to sniff out political instability. Allegedly. The dog's name was Leopold. Or at least that's what the Queen chose to call him. The letter included a list of suggested names, but Victoria crossed them all out in a single stroke. "They are too obvious," she said. "Besides, I've always liked the name Leopold." From the moment he arrived, it was clear this dog was not like Dash. Leopold had opinions. He disliked sudden movement, preferred rugs over wood, and refused to eat from any dish that didn't have a floral pattern. He growled at footmen. He ignored biscuits. He once stared at a stuffed pheasant for 5 full minutes before toppling it over with a single paw. Dash might have rolled his eyes. Leopold judged. The Queen, to her credit, tried to be accommodating. He was, after all, a diplomatic offering, the result of months of planning and expense. And perhaps most importantly, he came from a country that Britain was still trying to maintain favorable trade with. So the staff did what they always did. They adjusted. A new cushion was ordered, embroidered with a thistle motif per Leopold's national origin. A menu was devised filled with unfamiliar meats and spices. Monsieur Beaulieu nearly fainted upon reading the ingredients. Is that fermented trout paste? You would think a dog would be grateful. But Leopold? He sniffed. He turned away. He had that look. The Queen, however, was charmed. At first, she liked the challenge, called him refreshing. He has a spine, she told her ladies-in-waiting. Not everyone here does. Historians still argue whether Leopold's arrival truly sparked a diplomatic shift, or simply added fur to an already complicated situation. One thing's certain, things got weird quickly. Within a week, the French ambassador made a veiled joke about gifts with teeth. The Queen did not laugh. Within 2 weeks, rumors swirled that Leopold had barked during a reading of new tariffs. Staff couldn't confirm, but the Queen vetoed the bill the next day. Within 3 weeks, someone no one ever claimed credit replaced all of Leopold's portraits in progress with sketches of Dash. The Queen noticed, but said nothing. Then came the slipper incident. It began innocently enough. Leopold, already known for his discerning taste, had taken a particular liking to the Queen's evening slippers. He didn't chew them. He didn't wear them. He simply sat on them like a brooding feathered egg and refused to move. For hours. This might have been overlooked quirky even until one evening, as Victoria hosted a member of the House of Lords. Leopold sauntered into the parlor with a slipper in his mouth. He dropped it pointedly in front of the guest and barked. Once, loud. The guest, caught off guard, chuckled nervously. "I suppose he's not fond of me." Victoria, expression unreadable, simply replied, "He's an excellent judge of character. You almost admire the dog." But the real scandal, what court gossips later called the Chewed Treaty affair, unfolded quietly one wet February morning. Documents had been laid out for review in the Queen's study. Papers of mild but sensitive nature, trade proposals, diplomatic overtures, handwritten notes. And somehow, Leopold got in. By the time they found him, one sheet had been thoroughly crumpled, a corner chewed clean off, and paw prints dotted the margins. It would have been funny if not for the fact that the chewed note had been penned personally by a prince whose family line included more than a few battlefields. The Queen was mortified, or at least she pretended to be. I suppose she said slowly that one cannot please everyone. The note was rewritten. The prince was mollified. The treaty passed, though slightly delayed. But something shifted in that moment. Not with the Queen, with the dog. From then on, Leopold behaved differently. Less brash, more deliberate, as if he sensed the power he held and also its limit. He stopped growling, started sulking. Staff began reporting strange behavior, late-night pacing, snubbing treats, prolonged sighing. One maid swore he started staring longingly at Dash's old cushion. Another claimed to have seen him nose a portrait, then wander away, tail low. Eventually, Leopold was gifted onward. Not dismissed, not rehomed. Gifted to a distant cousin who had always admired his poise. The Queen said it was best for his temperament. Privately, she told Letson he's too aware. Dash never plotted. And perhaps that's the difference. Dash had instinct, love, simplicity. Leopold had politics. You visit the room where Leopold once slept. His cushion remains folded in a corner unused. A small tin of imported marrow treats sits on a shelf untouched, and in the window barely visible unless the light hits just right, a paw print on the glass pressed there in what must have been a final watching moment. Because even Leopold, with his pretentious prawns and diplomatic lineage, knew the truth. You don't replace Dash. You just try not to fall too short of him. It starts in the scullery, as most royal mischief does. The air smells faintly of rosemary and boiling broth. A tray of golden pheasant pâté rests on the cooling rack, still steaming slightly. The Queen has requested it be presented to her for luncheon alongside buttered beans and a modest elderflower cordial. All is in order, until it disappears. Not the whole tray, just one tart. One perfectly formed, delicately glazed, crown-molded tart gone. Vanished into the ether as if spirited away by a particularly refined ghost. Or, as it turns out, by a scullery maid named Agnes. Agnes is new, 16, pale as flour, and entirely unaware of the invisible tripwires laid throughout the palace. She's been here only a fortnight and has already tripped over 2 footstools, dropped a candle snuffer, and mistakenly called the master of the robes your horseship. But stealing food, that's bold. You trail the hushed investigation. The head cook is aghast. The footmen are scandalized. The tray is rechecked, the larder examined, and then someone never named spots a smear of pâté on a linen napkin near the servants' quarters. The trail begins. It leads not to Agnes directly, but to her dog. Yes, Agnes has smuggled her mutt into the palace. His name is Tuppence. He's scrappy, mud-colored, likely part terrier, part something that once lived in a chimney. His eyes bulge slightly. His tail curls in the wrong direction. And he is without a doubt the single most unrefined creature ever to tread across palace tile. You find him in the servants' laundry, licking the inside of a copper pot with the determination of someone who knows flavor when he finds it. The Queen is informed. What follows is not rage, not even disappointment, just curiosity. She asks to see the dog. Tuppence is brought in bundled in a linen sack for decorum. He is unceremoniously upturned onto a small rug near the Queen's feet. He sniffs, he sneezes, he flops down. Victoria leans forward, observes. Not much to look at, she murmurs. Tuppence yawns, revealing one gold tooth, allegedly. The court braces for dismissal. But then, the Queen does something strange. She smiles. A real smile, small but unmistakable. He's awful, she says. I like him. Historians still argue whether this was mercy or madness. But Tuppence is not punished, nor is Agnes. Instead, a new rule is instituted: no staff pets within dining proximity to the royal kitchens, which is frankly lenient. Still, the pâté incident becomes legendary. The palace staff begin whispering about the bite heard round the kitchen. Jokes abound. Tuppence becomes a minor folk hero. Someone sketches him wearing a crown. Another writes a song sung to the tune of God Save the Queen with the chorus bold Tuppence took the tart and won Her Majesty's heart. But of course, not everyone is charmed. Monsieur Beaulieu is livid. He calls Tuppence a culinary criminal. He threatens to resign. The Queen gently but firmly tells him to reconsider. I've survived worse than a stolen tart, she says. And frankly, so has the pheasant. The theft does, however, spark a renewed scrutiny of food protocols. From then on, all royal meals are stored under lock and key until final inspection. Guards are posted. A footman is designated food flow liaison. His only job, make sure nothing edible vanishes. And yet, more food starts disappearing. Just crumbs. A biscuit edge. The corner of a smoked haddock toast. Always in the staff quarters. Always at odd hours. The queen, when told, raises an eyebrow. Do we have mice, Beaulieu, fuming growls? Only the large, muddy, four-legged kind. Eventually, the mystery unravels. Other staff members have been sneaking bits of leftovers for tuppence. It's become a thing. They say he growls at the pantry ghosts, that he once found a missing brooch, that he sleeps with one eye open and guards the linen closet, and most unbelievably of all, that he barked twice when the new footman lied about his birthplace. The queen, upon learning this, laughs for a full minute. Tuppence is watching becomes an unofficial warning. Even Victoria warms to him. Slowly, grudgingly. She never allows him in formal chambers, but she permits him access to the service courtyard. And once, only once, she's spotted dropping a scrap of roast into her gloved palm and walking it out herself. He's hideous, she says, but honest. You start to see it too. There's something about Tuppence. He doesn't ask. He doesn't pander. He just is. Unapologetic, grubby, fierce, loyal. And in that way, he's nothing like Dash. And yet, maybe that's the point. Where Dash ruled with dignity and poise, Tuppence rumbles in like a soot-stained jester. Where Dash received monogrammed bows, Tuppence wears a frayed rope as a collar. But both in their own way pierce through the layers of palace varnish and reach something raw, something human. Because whether you're a queen or a scullery maid, there's a part of you that softens when a dog trusts you, when he trots beside you in the quiet, when he chooses your foot to sleep near. Tuppence never replaces Dash, not remotely, but in a strange, ridiculous way he reminds the court and the queen that love doesn't always look like silk and silver spoons. Sometimes it has mud on its tail, and very suspicious breath. You wouldn't expect it. But Dash's influence didn't die with his last bark or the settling dust of his gravestone. Instead, he did something far rarer in history. He set a fashion. No, not in collars or coats, though there were certainly ripples there. Dash redefined what it meant to own a pet in Victorian society. He transformed the humble house dog from functional creature to full-fledged family member. A cultural shift so soft, so padded with paws and biscuits that most historians never noticed it happening. But you walking through the Queen's chambers can trace it in every dog dish, every dainty paw step on hand-woven carpet. Before, Dash royal dogs were sporting animals, hounds that lived in kennels. Retrieved fowl barked in the background while ministers made decisions. After Dash, they became companions, confidants, creatures with embroidered footrests and dedicated staff. And as the monarch leads, so follows the nation. Soon, portraits of the nobility start changing. In the 1820s, family paintings showed rows of starched collars, tightly laced corsets, and perhaps a solemn setter sitting obediently by the fire. By the 1840s, spaniels were posed on laps. Pugs sat on velvet chairs. Dogs, small, squirmy, attention-demanding, were front and center. You pass a portrait of Lady Chatsworth, one of Victoria's more flamboyant cousins, holding a Pomeranian in a lace bonnet. Behind her, the butler holds a tray of dog-sized tartlets. The caption reads, "To Dash who taught us all." Possibly sarcastic, possibly not. Middle-class families began to imitate the trend. Pet shops, once plain stalls hawking collars, and meat scraps began selling dog beds with tassels. Tea rooms included pet menus. One bakery in Bath famously began making bone-shaped shortbread, and within a year had to hire a second baker just to meet demand. Pampering pets wasn't new. But systematized pet devotion, the calendar keeping, the accessory cataloging, the meticulously observed nap windows, that was pure Dash. Historians still argue whether this cultural ripple was intentional or incidental. Did Victoria seek to redefine human-animal relationships? Or was she simply a lonely girl, pouring love into something soft and predictable? Likely both, but the results were undeniable. By 1850, dog funerals were no longer rare. Memorials popped up across the countryside, tiny headstones in gardens, inscriptions carved into trees. Some even quoted Dash's epitaph, lifting entire phrases from the Windsor plaque. You find a scrapbook in the Royal Library compiled by a bored archivist decades later. It's filled with clippings from newspapers, family letters, even bits of poetry, all paying tribute to beloved dogs. most of them echoing Dash's legacy in tone, if not in grandeur. One poem reads, "He licked my tears and wagged his tail. He did not judge. He did not fail. And though the world may spin anew, I'd trade it all for Paws and you." Even schools began incorporating the idea of animal kindness into their curriculum. A children's primer from 1855 includes a lesson titled, "What Dash Taught the Queen." The answer: to be kind, to listen, to share crumbs when no one else will. You close the book smiling and walk into the modernized royal pet chamber. Yes, it still exists. On one wall is a timeline of royal dogs lovingly drawn and captioned. And at the very start, framed in polished cherry wood, is Dash. His likeness sketched by Letson, preserved beneath glass. His name painted in gold. Beneath it is a quote he reminded her that love need not bow. In another corner, a digital touchscreen displays the current royal pets. Yes, touchscreen. And yes, they still carry little fragments of Dash's legacy. The food preferences, the lap-sitting schedules, the grooming protocols, even the velvet cushions now custom-made and imported, but still unmistakably Dashian. And it wasn't just Britain. Across Europe, monarchs who had once paraded their hunting hounds began posing with Pekingese in carriages. The Russian court famously appointed a canine companion officer. France saw a brief but intense fad of papillon cravats and dog-themed hat pins. Even a young American visitor reportedly charmed by the Queen's puppy policies returned home and gifted his daughter a dog named Liberty, along with her own silver brush and monogrammed treat box. That daughter grew up to write children's books about talking dogs, one of them named Dashiell. Coincidence possibly, but the paw prints stretch wide. You step outside now into the soft evening air. The palace garden smells of honeysuckle and old memories. Somewhere a dog barks, not a royal one, just a gardener's mutt chasing moths near the gate. Still, you smile, because in a world built on hierarchy and protocol, Dash carved out a space for loyalty without expectation, for affection that didn't require strategy, for silliness, softness, and most radical of all, genuine emotion. He did not wear a crown, but he left behind a kingdom. And whether the Queen knew it or not, she had changed the world by loving him so loudly. Night has settled over the palace. The windows glow softly from within the corridors, whisper with candlelight, and the world, for now, has hushed its demands. You find yourself once again in the garden, drawn as always to the one quiet stone beneath the willow. You approach slowly. The leaves stir in a gentle breeze, brushing against one another like dry parchment, like memory. And there he is, not in body, of course, but in everything. The air seems warmer here, softer. The grass is neater. You could convince yourself it grows better beneath this tree, that it, too, remembers him. You sit on the old bench. The wood creaks familiarly beneath you. The marble glows faintly in the moonlight. You run your fingers over the inscription, not to read it, not anymore, but to feel the grooves of time. The dips where weather and weeping have smoothed the letters where fingertips have lingered in reverence and regret. Favorite spaniel, it says. But he was more than that. He was a mirror, a rebellion, a comfort wrapped in fur. He was the softest thread in a life sewn too tightly. Tonight the palace sleeps. The Queen sleeps. But Dash watches still, maybe in spirit, maybe in legacy, maybe only in the hearts of those who still leave violets at his stone. And maybe that's enough. Because in the end, what more is history than a series of echoes? Footsteps recorded or forgotten that shape the spaces we now fill. Dash's paws never stomped, never marched. But they left prints quiet, padded, unmistakable. In portraits, in hearts, in garden paths and dog biscuits, and the way we whisper kind things to animals who do not judge us. He taught a queen how to be tender, and through her taught a kingdom the same. As you rise from the bench and begin your slow walk back toward the palace, you feel it a stillness behind you. Not absence, presence. The kind that doesn't need to be seen to be known. You glance over your shoulder one last time. The willow sways, the stone glimmers, and if you listen very, very closely, you almost hear the soft click of paws on gravel. Now, as you settle into your blankets, the story folds itself around you like a velvet cloak. The palace fades. The fire dims. The long corridors and silver bowls, the slippers and the little dog beds, they soften into the haze of dreams. Your breathing slows. The world outside melts away. Imagine Dash now not regal or painted, not nestled in brocade or surrounded by butlers, but simply curled beside a window, his head tucked into his paws, the rise and fall of sleep rippling through his small frame. He's not waiting for anything, not performing, not guarding, just being. And perhaps that's the most royal thing of all. You can feel the hush of the palace around him like the breath before a lullaby. You can see the garden just outside bathed in moonlight. The gravestone is still. The tree above it sways gently, casting lace-like shadows on the earth. And in that silence, Dash endures not as a pet, not as a footnote, but as a feeling. Of comfort, of gentleness, of a time when love was measured in ear scratches and shared toast, and the quiet understanding between a queen and her dog. Let that warmth hold you now. Let the footsteps fade. Let the history soften. You are safe. You are still. And Dash. He's already dreaming.